Senator Ludlow, are you ready to go?
I'm going to cover a couple of different issues. I might just follow up where Senator Conroy left off briefly on the Tazzy overhead rollout trial. Is it not the case that Aurora Energy had conducted quite extensive trials? Why, can you just maybe spell out for us why NBN Co felt that it needed to do another trial?
There was from my recollection, I believe this was in February of this year, there was a statement that a full aerial trial would be more cost effective, and at the time, given the advances in technology, I think it was put since they did their original aerial rollouts in 2011, that there may have been potential cost reductions to an aerial rollout. As we said at the time, look, we welcome any way to make the rollout more cost effective, and so we said we would pursue doing a full trial with Aurora, and we immediately engaged in those conversations.
All right. These debates were had quite extensively, I think, certainly as long as I've been around doing this stuff about the relative short-term benefits of an aerial rollout as opposed to the longer-term benefits, safety, resilience of the infrastructure, lower maintenance costs of underground cabling.
I think we're along there.
Yeah, well, what is the company's view on the relative merits of either? Well, how do you judge where you'll go one way or the other?
Well, at the moment there hasn't been a compelling enough case to go full aerial. I think that's consistent with what we're currently rolling out. The multi-technology mix planning rules that are being developed at the moment will clearly, if the HFC comes into play, it is in a large case an aerial network with aerial lead-ins. But for us, the current planning rules for fibre to the premise are predominantly, underground where possible, and aerial as an alternative.
Okay, in that order. In
that order.
Yeah. Is anybody, to your knowledge, laying out HFC at the moment? Is that network being expanded?
No, I understand no one is at this point in time. Oh, sorry, are you talking about in Australia or globally?
No, here.
Yeah.
As far as your...
Sorry, just to clarify that. There are people rolling out HFC all over the world, but no, in Australia, no, I think it's well known that they're not.
Okay. I want to come to the financial...
Can I just clarify that?
It's broadband on HFC today, right?
Yeah, it's broadband on HFC today. When you say rolling out network, the networks are being upgraded.
But expanding, I'm talking about expanding the footprint.
Expanding the footprint, no, I don't believe they are.
Yeah. Okay. I want to come to... You've been at this now for a while. The comparisons or the kind of ground truthing, I guess, that you can tell us about what was published in the strategic review last November, particularly on the financials for the various network types, compared to what you have learned thus far since last November. Starting maybe with the fibre to the basement trials, there were estimates that were contained in the strategic review. How are they benchmarking against what's actually happening?
I think we're still early days on the trial, Senator. We're still formulating the data right now. I suspect within the course of the next 3 months we'd be able to have that sort of information, but at this point in the process it's too early. 3 months,
all right. Are there any red flags going up, I guess, within the company as a result of the work that you've done to date that you're likely to be off the mark of what was predicted? Or do you feel as though you're going to...
On fibre to the building, do you mean?
Yeah.
No, nothing that we'd be aware of.
Nothing scary to report yet, but no final numbers.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's talk about the fibre to the node trials then in terms of rollout costs. How are they sitting within the estimates that were provided last November?
The fibre to the node trials? This would be the your minor and Epping?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, I want to go to some of the reporting, including...
Again, it's early days.
It's not that early. We've been at this for a few months.
Yeah, the Epping and your minor trials, as we said, were very early construction trials, and there were, to connect end users to actually do any sort of, I suppose, cohesive speed trials required a negotiation for access to Telstra's copper loops. That has taken some time, and once we got access to the copper loops and we knew we had access, we then had to engage with the RSP community to see if they wanted to take on a trial. So when I say early days, I don't believe, whilst we've stood the nodes, I don't believe that there has been any end user connected yet, although I believe that is well advanced and is imminent.
It's remarkable. The election was last September. The announcement was made well before the election that the government wanted to pursue fibre to the node architecture. It's now mid-July. You don't have a single customer on the grid. So I wouldn't ask you to provide me a single financial number then, because we still don't know.
The government announcement, and as I said, I joined the company in November last year.
November.
And as I understand it, it was a policy. I don't think there was any direction or accountability to go out and start designing fibre to the node products, architecture, start negotiating for equipment, because the government's policy today was fibre to the premise.
No, the government's policy as of the day after the last federal election was to abandon that fibre to the premise rollout and go straight to a fibre to the node. That was a reasonably clear election commitment. I think it was wrong, but nobody could say that they didn't see it coming.
I thought the first step was to undertake a strategic review.
No, there was a really clear policy commitment made. I'm not trying to play silly buggers here. I think the government's overturned a vast number of its election promises, but this is not one of them. They've moved to a fibre to the node architecture, leaving some of the...
To be clear, the first part was a strategic review. Before you could even really start building too much product, you want to make sure that you've got a deal done with the people that own the copper, which is Telstra. So those deals are clearly being negotiated. Now that we feel more confident, in parallel, we've started doing architecture work on fibre to the base building. That product has been through trials with end users connected, so we understand how that's working. We're now building out our OSS and our IT systems, and that will be ready for commercial launch, as we've communicated to the industry, for RSPs to be able to connect and use and sell that in February. We'll use the fibre to the basement technology, the software, the IT systems we've built to act as the fundamental underpinning for our fibre to the node product. We've got the 1,000 node trial that's been
I'll come to that in a sec.
So, you just don't, on the back of a decision, run out and build these products and drop them out in the drop of a hat. The technology, the network release, the issues we need to deal with, which is consultation on the product architecture with the industry, things like who's running the installations, node splitters, there's service qualification around the copper. There are a lot of complex issues that need to be resolved. So it would be unlikely that you would ever get a product launched within 12 months of announcing such a fundamental change.
When do you think it'll be possible? Mr. Morrow, you gave us an estimate of 3 months. You'll be able to tell us how well the fibre to the building trials conform to the estimates that were made in the strategic review. Do you care to provide us with an estimate for the fibre to the node rollout?
Again,
in terms of time?
I think in about 3 months' time, we'll have a lot more information that we can share in terms of indications. As you know, there's a lot that has to happen before one can conclude exactly what the financials are. Indications, again, I think we can give you on fibre to the basement in a few months' time. The fibre to the node, again, I think we have to get through a much larger project than fibre to the building. This is the new 1,000 node trial that was just recently signed. That will take over the course of 6 to 12 months for us to understand exactly how the planning, the design, the construction will go, what sort of IT systems need to be put in place. From that, we can derive, therefore, what the economics would look like. But that's going to be a far greater time frame than fibre to the building.
Well, it's a much larger footprint, but you're telling us now 6 to 12 months from next February before we will have meaningful data back from a trial.
Oh, no. Over the course of this next 6 to 12 months since we signed this agreement.
What would you be prepared to come at us with by the time we reconvene for October estimates? Assuming we don't see you in this committee before then, that's within a 3-month window for some data on fibre to the building.
Right. Well, we can hopefully provide some indicative information, but we won't know until we get into those details.
Okay. Well, I mean, indicative information was provided last November. I think it's a reasonable expectation that as you learn more, you'll be able to tell us whether that's tracking or not. Assuming the next federal election is in the 3rd or 4th quarter of 2016, and your trial, your 1,000-node trial and some of the other trials that are occurring are successful and you ramp up at the pace that you hope, how many premises would you anticipate that would actually be plugged into a fibre to the node network by 3rd quarter 2016, or will we still be at the trial stage by then?
Yeah, we would be far too early to predict what that is. There was some...
For a precise number, you must be able to give us an order of magnitude.
I think until we get through the trial and understand how things are going to work, we're not even sure about the details with the Telstra agreement. There's also the scoping and the due diligence on the copper out there. Senator, I appreciate the importance of having that information, and as soon as we have it, we'll provide that.
You'd be aware that one of the government or the then opposition's commitments that it brought to the election was that was going to complete the rollout faster than it was occurring under the former government's end-to-end fibre proposal supported by the Greens. Right. And yet now you're not willing to tell us whether by the 2016 election we will even have moved beyond the trial stage for fibre to the node. It doesn't sound like a quicker rollout to me. As a grievous...
Not when you were promised to reach 25 meg to every Australian by 2016.
By 2016. Now we're not even sure whether we will have moved beyond the trial stage. Now you guys are engineers and you're not making political decisions, and I won't ask you to comment on that. Maybe I will. Was a grievous miscalculation made by the former or the present government when they were in opposition?
To be fair, Boston did tell Malcolm that he wouldn't possibly do it, but the price of them keeping quiet is that they get lots of work.
Chair,
Now we're enjoying ourselves.
Just to have a chat.
Could you even... I don't think it's unreasonable to even get a sense of an order of magnitude rollout scale. If things proceed according to how you hope they will, I'm asking for a best case scenario, really.
Yeah.
Will we be beyond the trial stage by 2016?
Yeah, most certainly we should.
Okay, what kind of scale? What, just rough numbers, order of magnitude of connected customers on a fibre to the node network by then?
It's too early to tell. I would
That's
only be
remarkable.
Speculating, Senator, and I think that would be
We
inappropriate
have
for
12
the
million
committee.
homes covered.
Will we have 12 million homes? Is there any possibility at all that we would have 12 million homes connected by 3rd quarter 2016?
At this point, I would say we don't see any reason as to why we can't stick with the strategic review projections. There's nothing saying that we cannot meet those. However, until we get through the details associated with the trial that Mr. Adcock and Telstra worked through on some of the details for the 1,000 nodes, until we get through the rest of the fibre to the building, we have some fibre to the DP components that we need to look through. We could not give you accurate information or information that we would feel comfortable at this point telling you, Senator, and this is with respect.
Yeah, I understand. I think it has been a respectful conversation thus far. Would you be prepared, though, to just categorically rule out that you'll have connected and plugged in 12 million people by 3rd quarter 2016? Can we just take that off the table?
No, I would not rule that out, Senator. Again, there's no reason to disbelieve what was put out in that report late last year. We are working towards that. We see nothing that puts us that in jeopardy at this point, but again, there's a lot that we need to understand and know before we can conclude with any degree of confidence.
So 6 to 12 months from now, you'll have enough data from a 1,000-node trial to be able to provide some more confident projections.
I believe we would, yes.
Just coming back, I think that's what you've informed us of before, which would then give you about a year to hook up the remaining 12 million. Is that seriously what you're telling us? How many is that per day?
Again, Senator, we are working towards ramping up to be able to meet the expectations that have been set out within that review. If we feel that through what we learn that is unrealistic and or different than what that review is, we will be bringing that forward.
But you don't think it's reasonable to declare that as unrealistic?
Not at this stage, not yet.
Remarkable. Okay. The original fibre to the node trial, so Umina, I'm probably pronouncing that wrongly, which was to serve about 1,000. Umina, beg your pardon, I knew someone would jump in. I think it was set to serve about 100 users, Epping about 100 users. When do we get preliminary data back from those?
What do we get? Sorry, when?
The data back from the 100-user trial.
Oh,
Costs and timing.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we had to get through the negotiations with Telstra to get access to the copper. Yeah. You know, once that's done, we'll get some news on. We won't. I don't believe it was ever envisaged that you would connect a full 100 users. It was to make it available to that footprint. It's a coverage thing as opposed to a connection.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's a 9 or 10 months since the election thing, and you don't have any customers yet.
We didn't have access. We didn't have agreement to access the copper.
How's the negotiations with Telstra going?
Progressing well. Again, I think that there is an alignment in terms of how this needs to be done. I think the cooperation by both Telstra and NBN has been positive. I'm optimistic that the results will be healthy for NBN, its customers, and the shareholders.
Any idea of when some kind of agreement will be closed out?
Not yet.
What kind of timetable are you working to?
As soon as possible.
But will you be telling us that in 6 months' time? That's a very, very open-ended way to respond to that question.
I hope that isn't the case. What is difficult to predict, as soon as you put several lawyers and attorneys in a room, they're very detail-oriented, and sometimes that can take longer than we want.
I'm not asking you to rush a process that has such enormous consequences for the taxpayer.
Thank you.
But nonetheless, this rollout is dead in the water until an agreement is signed.
And that is the reason, as Mr. Simon mentioned earlier, the benefit of the 1,000-node trial not only allows us to be able to assess how the processes will work, what integrated systems that we need, the collaboration with the industry partners, but it also helps us in terms of the homes that therefore could be served by those 1,000 nodes to accelerate that. So at this point in time, I don't feel under pressure. In order to stay with the schedule that was laid out within the strategic review, I don't feel under pressure to be able to sign an agreement tomorrow with the larger DA.
We haven't got any details of what your timelines were. They're all blacked out.
Right. They weren't blacked out for me.
You haven't failed to hit any of them because we have no idea what they were.
We don't know what they were.
Perfect. We're doing really well on all of us.
You were 100% on target.
We know what your timelines were. We also don't know what the projected costs of remediation or maintenance of the copper were, which I would say is probably the single most important variable as to the final costs of whether this in fact ends up costing the taxpayer more than the former government's model of an end-to-end fibre to the premise model. Do you have anybody presently connected in the minor trial?
No.
No, zero?
No, it was the access to the copper issue, Senator.
What's taking so long? It's a small trial.
I think Mr. Morrow indicated when you get a bunch of attorneys and lawyers in a room, the smallest details can take some time.
But they have.
And again, in fairness to all parties, you know, the access to the copper had some rather wide ramifications that needed to be dealt with in the context of, you know, the regulation around access to the copper. And whilst it's very easy for us to sit around and say, well, we've built a node, just clip across, we had to make sure that all the relevant stakeholders were comfortable with the arrangements that were being put in place.
Mr. Turnbull made it sound so easy last year. Do you have the ACCC in the room for those negotiations? Is that what you're alluding to?
No, we don't have the ACCC in the room. Right now it's a bilateral sort of discussion. We naturally know we need to comply in a lot of different areas, and we seek counsel on that as we go.
One of the parts of the rollout that I guess has been proceeding while the fibre to the node trials are crawling along in the background is the fibre to the premise rollout, I guess particularly in Greenfields estates, but elsewhere. So what can you tell us about the rollout costs there? Have they changed significantly over the last 9 months, specifically for the fibre to the premise installations you're doing?
I know Mr. Rue is coming up to speed on this, so let me offer something in this category. When I look at what was expected, I think we are in line in the range that was given. I know things... Well, through the strategic review that had come out. And
I might ask you to be a bit more specific. I've given you a fair bit of latitude on my previous two questions because the rollout is at a much earlier stage than I'd realised.
Right.
But you have been doing thousands of fibre to the premise installs, thousands every month.
Yes,
so I'd ask for a bit more precision on this question.
Can I explain, Senator, that and again, I have built out many networks and dealt with the economics of a highly capital projects like this. Stages as the build, you have ebbs and flows. So suddenly you can have at a period of time far more cash that goes in. So when you try to average for any one point in time, those numbers can fluctuate, right? So when we look at the figures that are given today on what was expected on the fibre to the prem CPP basis, we're in line with that. And those
Can you give us I understand the spikes that happen, and that has actually been occurring for a while. But can you give us a number, a reasonably precise number per premise, averaged, if you like, over the last 9 months since the change of government? You want to provide that for, you might not have that at the table.
Can I take that on notice? Yeah. I'm trying to, you said precise, so let me come back with something on a notice there.
I appreciate
We'll be revisiting it after lunch.
After lunch, yep. Great, thank you.
Yeah, good, thank you. And again, just with a basis of comparison for what was contained in the strategic review, I'm presuming you're aware, in fact, you probably got it memorised, the conclusions of the strategic review. It wasn't well covered in the media, and it certainly wasn't emphasised by Mr. Turnbull, that the model where you radically redesign the fibre to the premise build using some efficiencies that are even in press today, and some technical, I guess, and some around subcontracting and some commercial efficiencies, could be built for a very modest reduction in ROI and at a timeline of only 2 years longer than this proposed multi-technology mix, even if we swallow for a moment the idea that you might still hit 12 million customers by 2016. Are we still in a position where we might not actually be better off just sticking with the original plan?
I'm sorry, Senator. In terms of your question, you're asking about whether or not...
There are 6 different options in the strategic plan.
Yes.
He's pointing to the one that actually shows that with radical redesign.
Scenario 2, radically redesign FTTP.
You probably haven't even bothered to genuinely look at it much because you've been told what you've got to do.
I understand the background, and sorry, what was your question then? Whether we should go back to option 2?
Indeed.
At this point, option 6 was decided by the board, and that's what we're running with.
Decided by the board, or was decided by the minister before the election, before any of this evaluation had been done?
I take my direction from the board of directors, and that's the direction I was given.
Maybe that is a political question rather than a technical one. Is anything that you?
So there may be additional information that you'd like to know about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Mr. Morrow said. As a result of that, clearly, and as a result of looking to be as efficient as we can, because in the multi-technology mix, fibre to the premise is still an option. We have teams now looking at how you reduce the cost of the fibre to the premise rollout. So if the cost curve comes down, clearly, and we've never said that fibre to the premise isn't an option.
No, it's one of the M's in the multi. I understand
absolutely.
that. You've got a whole heap of technology at the table. Compared to the effort and the energy that is going into the fibre to the node trials, which is obviously extensive, we'll come to that in a second. How many people, what is the scale of the endeavour that is looking at driving costs down in the fibre to the premise component of your build?
Oh, we have an initiative.
Who's doing that?
We have an initiative going where they're looking at the architecture and it's...
Be a bit more precise if you can. Who's they?
My team. I now have the technology office working for me, and they've been charged with challenging every part of the sort of technology to see what we can do to bring the cost curve down.
You touch HFC with a barge pole, you buy a CTO that's an HFC expert.
Senator Conroy, try to restrain yourself from your comment.
Can I also offer, Senator Ludlam, this to Mr. Adcock's point here, we're trying to do a lot of different things. We are not giving up on the fibre to the prem. No, I've heard no one say fibre to the prem is bad. It just is more costly than fibre to the node in the analysis that was done that I am trusting and running with.
What if that turns out not to be true? That's a really
then we're
serious
going to do
question.
something different. My direction is very clear. Get it done as soon as possible with a minimum service level and at the least cost possible. If fiber to the prem, with some of the activities that Mr. Adcock's talking about, turns out to be cheaper on a net overall TCO basis than fiber to the node, then we're going to do more fiber to the prem. To give you an idea, and so you don't think that we are all become fiber to the node zealots and religious on a particular technology, not too long ago, outside of Melbourne, we went to visit one of the manufacturers, Corning. I'll be very specific on this. They took us through a very innovative way to be able to reduce the cost to get fiber out to the homes, to reduce that CPP component on this. We were thrilled to hear this, because if we have more opportunity to do that than uses fiber to the node, you can bet we will, and that is within our remit. That does not require any other approvals or departmental related issues. That is what we'll focus on.
I'm very pleased to hear it. I feel as though you might have, my understanding is that that contradicts what you said, where your board has told you to pursue a certain thing, and these are decisions made obviously before you turned up. Is it conceivable that we could end up with an 80 or a 90% fibre to the premise mix if you're able to drive those costs down then? That wouldn't upset your shareholder ministers or your board?
I don't think it would upset anybody. In fact, I think people would be proud and happy with the fact that we're not taking a technology-specific option. We're agnostic. It's those three criteria that I'd given you earlier.
But then spell this out for me, because if you haven't, and feel free to contradict me at any point, you didn't then just contradict me that we might end up with a fibre to the premise footprint that could be 80 or 90% of your customer base. How the hell does that impact on your negotiations with Telstra, where you're asking them to use their copper? How much are you asking for?
Well, I can't give any details on the specifics of the copper elements within the agreement, but I can assure you, I am building for flexibility, whether it's agreements or interactions with suppliers, as Greg is pushing through on the technological side. So there is no conflict.
You've got an agreement at the moment, which is some elements of it embedded in law that give you access to Telstra's ducts.
Yes, indeed.
Just rip out the useless copper and thread those ducts with fibre to the premises.
Okay. So
you've got a range that apparently now stretches, and feel free to take this number off the table if it's simply not true. You've got a range that extends from 0 to 80 or 90% of the network, where maybe you won't need the copper, maybe you will just use the ducts, which is a form of government and green policy. How on earth are you working that into your commercial negotiations?
I can't speak to the commercial negotiations, but I can assure you our flexibility to keep with whatever technology makes sense is integrated into the plan.
But are we buying Telstra's copper off it, or are we maybe not going to need it?
I appreciate your
it's a reasonable question,
interrogation,
right?
Senator Ludlam, but however, while we're in the middle of the discussions, I cannot comment on any of the details.
If I can just jump in for a second. HFC covers 30% of the population, roughly?
Roughly.
So that's 30% of the copper you don't need from Telstra because you're not using their copper. Other than perhaps you're going to keep running a phone line over it, and it's a question that we've never got round to sorting out. But fundamentally, if you're using HFC upgraded, whatever standard you want to talk about, that's 30% of Telstra's copper you don't need. We've got 20%, according to forecasts, are going to be fibre to the home. That's 50%. But you're buying, well, you're trying to gain access to, buy, rent, whatever, 100% of Telstra's copper. I'm going to pay them billions of dollars for it. And half of it you're not planning on using, even on your current projections. Sounds like a good deal for the taxpayer.
Well, Senator, I think there's a lot of speculation, and I respect why. Without the information of how this deal is negotiated, one can run off into a lot of different scenarios. But I would, again, not being able to talk about the details within the agreement, assure you the flexibility for us to be able to deploy whatever technology we feel is suitable without a negative consequence is in a principle within the agreement.
So if you decide you don't need, because the cost of fibre to the prem is demonstrated by many people if you bother to look, and I actually encourage by the fact that you've indicated you are, because there are new technologies that have already in the last 3 years improved fibre to the prem. So let's just say suddenly through that you go, look, there's about 10% less of the copper that we'll need from Telstra. You're indicating that your objective is that you end up not paying Telstra whatever part of it is your design is for flexibility, so you can reduce your payment to Telstra by the equivalent of that 10% that you wouldn't be using.
Senator, again, without giving any details around the specifics of the discussion with Telstra, I can assure you, and let me be specific, you know, the two gentlemen on each side of me, the three of us have had a very specific discussion. We need to remain objective. We need to provide the best network that we can at the least possible cost in the most speedy amount of time. If that means, and we're doing a multi-technology mix, and let me take the copper FTTN as an example. If we find that copper is inadequate for us to be able to serve FTTN, either because it cannot produce the speeds necessary, please let me finish, or that the maintenance side of this is just too far gone because of whatever reasons, splices that have leaked, that have eroded, not been renewed or refreshed or replaced in an appropriate time frame, we will, even though it may be cut out in a footprint today to be slated for fibre to the node, we will take the decision to put fibre to the prim or an alternative technology.
The problem is not if there's a whole area, like, I mean, I've discussed Williamstown extensively, and Williamstown rated near the bottom of the department's ratings, which I could have told them without them having to do any work, given I live there. But it's more where there's an individual splice in one street or one home, and whether you be planning on putting copper in. I'm being told you're putting copper into a street where there's only one area in one street that is unsatisfactory performance. I'm hoping you're going to tell us, no, that's not right. But if it's one home has got poor copper, would you replace the copper or would you put fibre in? Because that affects your roll metrics and your costings. I appreciate if you said, look, that whole suburb is just so old, copper's been in the ground for 50 years, just rip it out and do the fibre to the home. But it's when you start going below that, then there is a straight cost trade-off.
If it's one home in the neighborhood that has an aerial lead-in dropping down to the house that's defective, but the rest of the copper is adequate within the neighborhood, then we're going to do fibre to the node. It's cheaper. We'll replace the lead-in from the pole to the customer's home. It all comes down to...
So you replace the copper in that case?
Just in that particular...
I can understand why you're saying that.
Yeah.
But some people think that if their copper's bad, then you'll replace it, even if they're the only one in the street. And I just wanted to make sure that might be an ambition of theirs, but is unlikely to be the case. And I think that's a reasonable answer that you've given.
It's a pragmatic we don't have religion on a technology. It's pragmatic. We'll look at the economics, the speed, the performance levels that we'll get out of the network. We also think, by the way, in economics, you know, the operational side of it. Right now, as we're building the network out, Greg's team is, you know, has a pretty easy job on operations, you know, keeping it up and running. You know, he tells me that all the time. When it gets bigger.
Misleading Senate committee.
When it gets bigger and we start throwing the copper networks and other networks in, that operational bit and the maintenance of that is going to obviously be a higher cost component. That we're factoring into the economics. That's the direction that we've been given. That's within the statement of expectations. And again, it's something that we think about all the time.
I know we're about to throw to a lunch break. I might just put a question on notice to you, Mr. Adcock, for consideration for when we come back. I'm interested in some specifics about what your team is doing from an engineering perspective, technical perspective, commercial perspective, subcontracting perspective, specifically on driving costs down
If you're happy.
in the fibre to the premise footprint. And you know why I'm heading in this direction. I'm very, very keen to know what fraction of your network won't be obsolete on the day you switch it on. And I'm very strongly of the view that your fibre to the node network, regrettably, but the decisions that were made before any of you showed up, will be obsolete on the day you install it. So I'm keenly interested in what you are doing and what kind of order of magnitude cost reductions you think you might get to pull the costs down, the projected costs of the fibre to the premises model. I think they were overcooked in the strategic review for reasons that are probably reasonably obvious to everybody. You've now got probably some of the smartest people in the country trying to figure out how to pull those numbers down. Just be very keen to see where you're going with that. If you just put that on notice to you.